2 days ago we stopped at that point. Someone just asked us, "What's the bottom line? Can I kill a mosquito on Shabbos?" Well, it depends on who you ask. I'm sure Rabbi Nadel has more sources than I do about the whole issue of what are the laws of killing bugs nowadays. Considering that everything sexually reproduces, there's a good argument to be made that nothing should be allowed to be killed. Not only that, chiyuv skila, person kills a louse, not like Chazal say. You could argue, no, killing a louse would be just as bad as killing a camel. Like Rabbi Eliezer says, killing a louse is killing a camel. Look, he did make such a claim back then. It is recorded in the Mishnah. It's recorded in the Gemara. And then there are those people who are purists and say that it doesn't really matter what Chazal paskin then. It could very well be, by the way, that maybe they were perhaps, I'd like to say, realizing that maybe if they weren't so confident in what they knew, after all, we're going to see the idea of Beitzei Kinim, louse eggs. So who's laying those lice eggs? And then they say, Rashi and others say, that's just a reference to a different type of bug that was even smaller, but they still were unaware that lice had actual eggs. There's a lot that needs to be said. And like I just said before, I think Rabbi Nadel, he learned with Rav Tendler. I'm sure he has all the opinions lined up there. I think he put out an article even about it somewhere. Every major Achron's opinion on the matter.
What he said,
yeah,
very briefly, was that Rav Tendler was against killing lice.
Okay, makes sense.
The negative Shulchan.
Okay, so my rule is, if you want to be machmir and not to kill lice on Shabbos, go right ahead. No one says you have to. And if you're going to try to, I guess, have someone stoned in Beis Din for violating Shabbos because he killed a louse, I'm sure the Shulchan Aruch and the Rambam will come to his defense, because there you go. They did rule that it was permissible. So which line? We're seeing the Machlokas Beis Shammai Beis Hillel at the bottom of page Yud Beis Amud Aleph, page 12A. We didn't get to say it then. Beis Shammai were the ones who prohibit ein horgin of macholeth b'Shabbos. A macholeth in this case would be, like Rashi says, a kina. Sometimes it's a different type of parasite, but what all these bodily parasites have in common is that they suck human blood, and they come up in other halachas also. And if they're killed, they leave a red spot. Has anybody ever killed a mosquito while it's trying to actually bite a person? Kind of interesting. That's usually where you catch these things. And Beit Hillel permit, and that is how the halacha was traditionally viewed. Hold on, I'm going to let someone else in. Yes, that's how the halacha traditionally viewed it. What else do we have here? V'chein haya Rashba Omer. What?
Read slowly.
Sorry. Say it louder. Okay.
Difficulty hearing.
V'chein haya Rashba Omer. That's Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar said. Mishum Rashbag. That's Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel, who happens to be Rabbi Yehuda Nasi's father, who said, "Ein mishadachina tatinokoth le'ares." We do not make shidduchim, arranged marriages. Well, for children, yes. Even it used to be sometimes marriages were arranged, even when the children could be considered tinokoth. Often the tinok means a baby, or at least one who's nursing, but sometimes it just means children. In this case, marriages were arranged early on. There's famous people, famous kings of Judah had their marriages arranged before they were even born. There was a story before that. He says you can't do this on Shabbos. V'lo et hatinoch l'lamdo sefer. And unlike the Shabbos Miros, it says you shouldn't arrange a tutor for the child to learn sefer. What's to mean learn sefer? Sefer means book, but as people ask when they come to Israel, they find out, how do you say a school in Hebrew? Beit Sefer. It doesn't mean house of book, because that would just be a library. What's the difference? Sefer in the book of Daniel means literacy, means to teach him to read and write. And that's why schools in classical Hebrew are called Batei Sefer, houses of literacy. Next, Ulamdo Umanuth, or to teach him a trade. Well, in this case, it's more a craft. It means to arrange for him to be apprenticed to someone who has a particular trade, and he'll learn the trade. And also, we do not go to console mourners. And we don't go to check on the sick. Bikur doesn't necessarily mean visit, because the commandment is actually to check on them and see what they need. Bikur means more than just visit. But in this case, Rashbag felt that all of these activities are not to be done on Shabbos. Notice you cannot really make a strong claim that any of these are chilul Shabbat. That is, they're not melachot. They're just things that the sages told us not to do. However, that's what Divrei Beit Shammai. That's what Beit Shammai say. Beit Hillel matirin. The Beit Hillel permit all of these activities, and that's why we have. Yes, there is such a thing as nichum avelim on Shabbos. People say, really? You ever go to someone's shiva house on Shabbos? Has anybody actually done that? Go visit a friend on Shabbos? It's kind of weird, but for some reason, the culture became not to, even though you'll find that this is explicit in Shulchan Aruch. What they did decry was, like we're going to see on the next page, someone dafka waiting for Shabbos to do it. If that's what you're going to do on your Shabbos, just like you have what to do on Chol Moed, it's technically permissible. You could find a way to do it, but say, I'll wait for Chol Moed when I'm free to do it. That's a problem. Kal v'chomer on Shabbos. Why are you not supposed to do it with Chol Moed, by the way? Because Chol Moed is there so that you have more time to study Torah or learn, as we say in Yiddish. And the Shabbos, Kal v'chomer, what you're supposed to do with your Shabbos is to spend your time studying Torah. So to say, I'm going to take from my day of Torah study, and dafka, that's when I'm going to go visit this fellow who is sitting shiva, unfortunately, that is wrong. But other than that, yeah, so people sit shiva on Shabbos, not the same way. They don't do it before Hesia. But we do, many of us, even though we have not gone to a shiva house on Shabbos for whatever reason, I have done it, it happened to neighbors, so you go. However, what people do, and they don't realize it is, wait a minute, we have this custom, at least you see it in Ashkenazic places, that they sing Lecha Dodi, which, by the way, is not a commandment. It's not a command to the Torah. Before they wrote the Piyut, they couldn't sing it. But they then have this practice that afterwards, they turn to the door and then they let the Avil in. They say, Nichum Avelim, or something like that, and then everybody mumbles something. It's at that point that you're supposed to actually console the mourner. The way I used to see is he walks and everybody says something, but no one actually walks over to him. It's a little difficult. I saw one rabbi in his shul in New Jersey. He actually walked to the door and spoke to the fellow. Yeah. So that was the right thing to do. But that is Nichum Avilim on Shabbos by definition. So if you could go over to someone in shul and give him Nichum Avilim, so you could go to his house. And by the way, another thing, Rav Tzuriel has written about this in an article that's must read for those people. I don't think anybody should ever prepare to sit Shiva, but for those people who want to be prepared to answer this question, based on the Gemara in Moed Katan, and also you can find this in the Shulchan Aruch, it's a very strange thing that we actually have a minyan at the mourner's house. That was an idea that developed from the concept that if, God forbid, someone were to pass away without any family, and there's no one who is sitting in mourning this fellow's passing, oh yeah, maybe people are sad, but there's no one who actually has to keep all the halachot involved with sitting shiva. So what do? We have men go out of their way to sit shiva for this person. They become his krovim and they sit in his house and they have a minyan and they daven there. And it somehow became the practice in the last few hundred years that every single mourner, and maybe even let's say a group, you have 5 men who are adults who can very well walk to shul on their own. For some reason, we make a minyan at their house and we even bring a Sefer Torah, which itself is actually against what? Surprise, the Shulchan Aruch. So that's a problem. So Rav Tzuriel wrote, and you could find this online very easily. He said, really, you should follow what is described in the Mishnah or in what's implied throughout Chazal and the Halacha books. And what we see even on Shabbos is that the mourner, yes, he doesn't leave his house to go to work and take care of whatever it is he does. Definitely don't go to parties. However, the mourner is still supposed to go to shul. And that's how everybody can do Nichum Avelim. And why should Shabbos be any exception? So I know there was one fool who said, Mirza Hashem, when I have to sit Shiva, I'm going to do it the way the halacha said. No, you don't say a thing like that. Okay? You don't anticipate having to sit Shiva, but people should be aware of this, that when the mourner comes to shul on Shabbos, that's when we do Nichum Avelim. And really the mourner is supposed to be in shul just like he's in shul on Shabbos. He should be in shul all week long. He leaves his house for Shachris and Mincha and Mariv, and that's the perfect opportunity for others to console him. And of course, he stays at home the rest of the day, and others should come to him then. And Shabbos is no exception. It might actually even be better. Sometimes you could have a fellow, why do we even do this? What is Nichum Avelim? Person who's really sad. It turns out that human interaction, social interaction, has some sort of positive effect on the human psyche. Everybody needs it. Thank God I've never sat Shiva, but I think a lot of people I know have. And that's what they crave. And it would be extremely awkward that all week long people are coming to see him and he feels comforted by that fact. But suddenly comes Shabbos and it's 3 o'clock in the afternoon. They're going to Mincha at 6. From 3 to 6, he's sitting all alone on Shabbos specifically. That's wrong. And they should not neglect Nichum Avelim on Shabbos. We follow Beis Hillel's opinion. And especially if someone already went once, he could go again. If he said, well, I went on Friday, I went on Thursday. Now I'm not going to go on Shabbos. No, the Shulchan Aruch said, Mishnah Berurah brings this. Don't wait specifically for Shabbos. Don't not go during the week and wait for Shabbos. But if you went during the week and he needs you on Shabbos, yes, go on Shabbos. It's a very important mitzvah. It's a darkei the avos to do a thing like this. Let's see the next brisa. It's the second to last line on this daf. It says, Tanu Rabbanan, hanichnas levakeret hacholeh, omer Shabbat hi milizok urfara krova lavo. You're familiar with that line. Really, you're not supposed to pray for the sick on Shabbos. What's the best example of us not praying for the sick on Shabbos specifically, like we normally do? No, we don't say the bracha of Rofei Cholim. Okay, we don't say that. That's all of those specific brachas, all the middle brachas of the Shmona Esrei, the daily Shmona Esrei, are left out on Shabbos. Also, to ask for a parnasa is a little bit not the right thing to do. Yeah, some difficulty. I know that Rabbi Rabinovich's son, who's not a youngster, he's my father's age, but he was the rabbi where we lived, and he did away with all the Misha Berachs. You can't find Misha Berachs. Did the Rambam say Misha Berachs? Did Rav Ashi say Misha Berachs? Did Rashi have them? Did the Ramah, the Shulchan Aruch have such a thing? Those are Bikoshi. We actually do such a thing. I know that the way where we daven on the high holy days, there are no Misha Berachs whatsoever, especially on Rosh Hashanah, which is a yontif. You're not supposed to be doing these types of things. Rabbi Soloveitchik was uncomfortable with saying the Brich Shmei, which only entered our siddur by about 140 years ago. How did it enter the siddur, by the way, in Ashkenazic lands? Brich Shmei, because there's used to be nice tunes. The Chazanim composed nice tunes. So now it's in there. So now they say Brich Shmei. Brich Shmei should not be said on Shabbos just for the simple reason that it is what? A prayer for Parnasa. On who's Zon Lechola and Farnes Lechola. Okay. Praying for children, praying for Parnasa is not Shabbos appropriate. So yeah, it's a good question. I know Sephardic shuls, they don't say that. Dafka on Shabbos, they don't say it, which is apparently correct based on this. So a person does visit the Chole, should really nish Shabbos gerecht, Shabbos hi milizok, but a refu is on its way anyways. We're not going to ask God, and we're not going to cry out to him because that's what you're not supposed to do on Shabbos. Rabbi Meir Omer, Yecholah hi she'terachem. What is Yecholah hi? What's the antecedent of this? Shabbos will take mercy on him. Anybody wonder about that? In tichabduha militztaherba. That's what Rashi says. If you honor it, a feminine it, from what? What don't you do? You don't trouble yourself or feel bad on it. Apparently they're discussing what? What feminine antecedent? The Sabbath. So somehow Rabbi Meir is saying the Sabbath itself can take pity on someone. He's talking about the Sabbath as though it is personified. What do we do? Like the Sabbath queen. Okay. So somehow just the fact that he kept Shabbos properly and didn't pray for his own recovery on Shabbos is a zechus that will help him recover. The fact that he doesn't pray, isn't that's amazing. You don't speak out too much. It's like a person who accepts all of God's decrees. If you're willing to accept God's decrees without even having to say, I know it feels bad, but I'm going to accept God's decree anyways. Just that, God's already going to start taking pity on him. And it's going to help him. Hold on, someone else is coming in. Okay. Yes, we're now turning the page. We're on Yud Beis, Amud Beis. Rabbi Yudah Omer, Hamakom Yerachim Alecha, Ve'al Chole Yisrael. He would say something that sounds more like a prayer. Notice there's no mark to say that this is poskened anywhere. He says the Makom, that's God who's everywhere. The one who is everywhere should take pity on you and on all of the sick of Israel. This is not poskened. Apparently this sounds too much like a prayer. Rabbi Yossi would say, but then again, maybe he wasn't discussing Shabbos now. He just says, generally speaking, a person should pray for the sick and say, God should have mercy on you and all the other sick. Rabbi Yossi says, Hamakom Yerachem Alecha B'thoch Chole Yisrael. God should have pity on you among all the sick of Israel, not you and the other sick, among them. And apparently that was a formula that found greater favor in the eyes of the subsequent stages, because Rashi points out he includes himself. Okay, he includes this victim among all the other Jews, and that's the proper way to pray. Vilna Gaon style. You find that all of the prayers in Shemona Esrei are asking for us. And who is the us? Kalal Yisrael. And it's actually quite wrong, he says, if a person says, ask for me. God, heal me. Yes, we find your Navi says, what the text of Rifa'enu, where'd that come from? Rifa'enu Hashem v'nei Rafei, Hoshienu v'ni Vashea. That's God, heal us, we shall be healed, save us, and we shall be saved. Who said that? That's a paraphrase from Yirmiyahu. Yirmiyahu said, God, heal me and I shall be healed, save me and I shall be saved. But then again, Yirmiyahu was speaking about his own personal danger, what was happening. He had been given God's mission. Hold on 1 second. Can we see the text? Yeah, hold on. I'll put the text on the screen. He had been given God's mission, and then what happened to Yirmiyahu? They tried to assassinate him. His own townsmen did not like what he was saying, so they tried to kill him. So Yirmiyahu actually had to pray that God save him, specifically from his neighbors. And it should never happen. If anybody here is being tried to kill by their neighbors, I feel very sorry for them. It's not the best situation. Please hold on 1 second while we try to put the daf on the screen. Oh man, hold on 1 second. See, somebody don't have it here. Surah Sadaf. Here we go. We're going to go to Shabbos, Yud Beis, Amud Beis. No, I'm going to share this. Sorry. I can't just press a single button and make it happen. Okay, it's still a little bit small, so I'll embiggen it now. 1 second. Okay, can you see it? Give me a thumbs up if you could see the daf on the screen. Here we go. Just put this over here. Okay, that should help, right? Yeah, it's basically the same size as here, so we'll use both. This is what we just read. Rabbi Yossi says they should include the sick person about whom he's praying in among the rest of Am Yisrael. Shevna ish Yerushalayim. Shevna, who is apparently prominent in Jerusalem, abichnisato omer shalom. He would say shalom. Okay, most people would say that when they come into the presence of the person who is ill. Ufi siato omer Shabbat himi lizok urfara krova lavo rachamal rubim v'shivthu b'shalom. He would add to this formula, but he also say once he was leaving, he would say here, of course, that Shabbos lizok, as we say, a refuah is coming, and then he says that God's mercy is abundant. And he also tells him shivthu v'shalom. What does it mean and rest in peace? No, it means desist. Shivthu is the verb form of to keep Shabbos. He says, Nuchu b'shabbatchem l'shalom. That's the way Rashi has it. You should rest this Shabbos peacefully. In English, it says rest in peace. That sounds kind of bad. It means like you're already hoping the guy's dead. But if you'd say it in Hebrew, what it means is you should just have a nice, relaxing Shabbos. And apparently like that formula. We don't use that formula. Why? It's a little bit wordy, but it's perfectly legitimate. Tosfos asks, who was this Shevna? So some assume, well, he's perhaps the biblical Shevna who was around in Hizkiyahu's time. And then they bring up, well, even that Shevna wasn't exactly a righteous person. He eventually tried to lead a popular uprising, not to dethrone King Hezekiah, but at least to undermine his policies. What was his policies? Resist the Assyrian invaders who besieged Jerusalem. And he did that, by the way, it had the endorsement of Yeshayahu Hanavi. However, Shevna was against it. Shevna was in favor of cut our losses and surrender and keep make sure the bloodshed's at a minimum. And then they say, but it could have been there was another Shevna. There's multiple Shevnas who were around at the time. There's Shevna Sofer and Shevna al Habayim. And then Tosfos also suggests, who even says that this has to be a biblical Shevna. Don't forget, the Shevnas they're discussing here, the biblical ones, were about 700 years or so before the times of the Mishnah. So it could very well be a Tana of the first century, who lived in the later times of the Second Temple and not mid-First Temple times. So it's not really so much of a kasha if Rabbi Tam says, why would we learn anything from a person who's apparently a Russia? It's like Yishmael. How many Jews name their children Yishmael nowadays?
Not too many.
Not too many. But there was Rabbi Yishmael. Rabbi Yishmael Kohen Gadol was a Tana and a Kohen Gadol, and a great man, and basically just short of being a prophet. We have his discussion, so to speak, with God Himself. So it's not that these names are necessarily bad. Yes, just because you have one example of someone who was a Russia in Tanakh, it doesn't mean that the name henceforth or from thenceforth is completely disqualified. Let's move on here. Sorry, I'm jumping between this. I have quite a few sources here. Keman Azla, Ha Amar Rabbi Chanina. Who does this follow? Rabbi Chanina says the following: Mi sheish l'chole b'toch beito, sarich she'yarvenu b'toch kolei Yisrael. A person has someone ill within his household. How do we know that he has to include him among the rest of the sick of Israel? That is, the prayers should not just be specifically for this fellow, but for this fellow among the rest of the ill of Israel. Kiman, who's the one? Rabbi Yossi. They must follow Rabbi Yossi's opinion. We just saw Rabbi Yossi said, "B'toch cholei Yisrael," whereas Rashi says, "Lichlol," include him among them. Okay. V'amar Rabbi Chanina, b'koshi hitiru l'nachem avelim u'vaker cholim b'Shabbat. It was actually quite difficult for the sages. Which sages? Beis Hillel, we saw on the previous page, to permit Bikur Cholim and Nichum Avelim on Shabbos. Really, what was so hard about it? It's a mitzvah. Why would it? What's the argument there? The Koshi Hitiru, and this Mishnah Berurah seems to say the Koshi because if you let people do it, like once again, they wouldn't do it during the week. They have to wait for it. Others seem to say that it could trouble people if, let's say, you are supposed to feel good on Shabbos, and suddenly every Shabbos you are going to have to go visit the people who are ill, or go to a Shiva house every single Shabbos. It might actually become quite depressing. So all these and other arguments were, I guess, behind why Beit Shammai even said, you know what, don't do these things on Shabbos. That's what makes them so not Shabbos-pick. But the halacha, like we saw, is no, we still do it. I'd like to announce that it says, just like, apparently it didn't pay Zoom enough. So in less than 10 minutes, we will be disconnected. So please, if that does happen, log right back in, and I'll let you back in, and we'll pick up the shiur from there. But it will go on, just even if we get disconnected before 11 o'clock or so. Let's see. I need to make this message disappear so I can see what's on the screen. Okay. We're now over here. Amar Rabba Bar Chana. Rabba Bar Chana would say, Ki hava azlinan batrei Rabbi Elazar. When we were walking behind Rabbi Elazar, l'shayule bit tficha. Okay, we wanted to ask him questions about tficha. What's a tficha? It means a person who was sick, according to Rashi. Zimnim Amar. Sometimes, and by the way, shayule is apparently levaker. Doesn't mean just to ask; it means to check up on them. That's why we're asking, "How are you doing?" Zimnin Amar Hamakom Yifkodcha l'Shalom. Sometimes he would say, God, the omnipresent, should remember you for peace. V'Zimnin Amar Rachamana Yidkarinach l'Shalom. He would say it in Aramaic. The Hebrew verb with code is similar to lizkor, but both become dalid kaf resh instead of zayin kaf resh in Aramaic, and shalom becomes shalom in Aramaic. So he would sometimes say it in Aramaic and sometimes say it in Hebrew. Now, here's the question. This is talking about minastam. We didn't mention Shabbos, and saying to someone, God should remember you. It's a prayer. So apparently, sometimes it made a difference if he used the Hebrew formula or the Aramaic formula. What did the sages speak, by the way? In Bavel, apparently, they did speak Aramaic. But in Eretz Yisrael, they spoke Aramaic and Hebrew, which is why we have discussions. You find Mishnayos, there's even Aramaic in Mishnayos. certain formulas were said in Aramaic and certain formulas were said dafka in Hebrew. I don't know why they didn't use English sometimes. When you want to be extra clear so people understand, you should say things just in regular English. But apparently that they didn't have that at the time. And we even have letters from Rambam Gamliel the Zaken, the grandson of Hillel, who was a major figure also in first century Second Temple times. And we see his letter to the exiles when he decreed that there was going to be a leap year, announcing already at Tishrei, there's going to be an Adar Sheni 6 months from now. So his letter was sort of Hebrew, sort of English. And once again, we have Mishnayos, certain formulas, Gittin and Ksubis and other things, or just declarations, had Aramaic languages in them. Okay, legally speaking, Aramaic is just as valid, but perhaps for prayer, Aramaic would be inferior. Why? How could he do such a thing? Praying in Aramaic. Vilha Amar Rav Yehuda, Vilam al Yishal Adam Srachav Bilshon Arami. A person should never ask God for his needs in the Aramaic language. Vilma Rabbi Yochanan, Kol Asher Tzrachav Bilshon Arami, Ein Malachei Asharet Nizkakino, Shein Malachei Asharet Makirin Bilshon Arami. A person who prays in Aramaic, so the angels are not going to be paying attention to him. Apparently, the angels who are in charge of bringing his prayers up to the divine throne aren't going to help him, and then his prayers will not be efficacious. And what? What?
We do it.
Oh, we do that. We do. I don't know about that. I'll tell you why I don't know about that once I finish this line here. And it says that these ministering angels, why can't they help him? Because they don't recognize Aramaic. Question among the Rishonim. Recognize meaning they refuse to recognize, just like I refuse to recognize Red China and the Palestinian Authority, or recognize because I just don't know it. You know, what is don't know it. So both in English, recognize has two meanings, and also in Hebrew. And that's a big machlokas in the Rishonim there. You have the opinion brought here by the Tur. The Tur mentions that his father, the Rush, felt that this was talking specifically about the Aramaic language. The angels understand Hebrew and Chinese and Klingon and any language you could think of, but they do not understand Aramaic. So the problem is Aramaic specifically. And other Rishonim say Aramaic was the vernacular at the time that was not Lashon HaKodesh, Hebrew. I used to think that Rambam specifically refers to Lashon HaKodesh only when it's specifically Tanakh language and not, let's say, Mishnaic language. That he calls Hebrew. And it turns out I was wrong because the Parish Mishnayos on Sota, the Rambam even calls language of Chazal also Lashon HaKodesh. This is against the opinion of the Satmars who feel that forms of Hebrew are not Lashon HaKodesh. They disagree with the Rambam. It turns out the Rashi also. Rashi clearly says that all the different forms of Hebrew, whether Mishnaic or Tanakh, by the way, our Hebrew's in many ways closer to the Tanakh than it is to Mishnaic Hebrew, is Lashon HaKodesh. So you already have this, once again, is it that the angels don't understand it, or they just refuse to understand it? And what is it? Is it anything but Hebrew, or specifically Aramaic? So because of this, you have many different opinions about the Insun Sugya, and the answer that they offer for this difficulty, which, by the way, is the same answer we're going to compare with somewhere else in Sota. What is the answer? How could Rabbi Chanina, Rabbi Elazar, how could he pray for the sick person in Aramaic if it's not so efficacious? The angels aren't going to help him. So he says, Shani Choleh Deshchina Imo. It's different. The Choleh, God is with him. The divine presence is with him. So the prayers will be heard. The angels, you don't need the angels to help bring up the prayers to God because God's right there anyways.
I don't understand.
What?
I don't understand this business with the angels. We learned and we were taught that, like Nachmi Serachamim in Slichas, you don't pray to angels. You pray to God.
Yeah, we don't pray to angels. You know, the Sephardic Slichas don't have those types of prayers in there at all. And the good Litvish prayer, the good Litvish Slichas also take all those Machnise Rachim and Bidas Harachamim, Alayhis Galgalit, etc. They actually take those out. They're of the opinion that those types of prayers should not be said. That's the Maimonidean view. And then again, we do have some people take this literally that, yes, the angels are helping out. And apparently those who wrote these piyutim and those who continue saying these piyutim believe that yes, the angels do have a role in bringing up our prayers. It's in Chazal. So we're going to get to this in a second. Let's get to the answer here. How do you know that the Shekhinah is assisting the sick person? Okay, Hashem will help him when he's on Eres Dewai. Eres is like a couch or a type of bed, and Dewai is the one where he's sick. It's like saying Oy vavoy, stuck in bed. Tani nami hachi. A person who comes to check up on the sick should not sit on the couch. Sometimes it means bed, sometimes it means couch, and not on the chair. Instead, he should wrap himself, cover his head, like with a talus, and if not, with whatever else he could cover his head. And he should sit in front of the sick person, because the divine presence is right above his head. Of the choleh, that is shel choleh. Shnemar Hashem yisodenu al eres dewai. Hashem should help. Once again, Hashem will help him when he's sick in bed. Now, in Masechet Sota, there's a Mishnah that says that the prayers can be said in any language. The Mishnah says, "Elu ne'amarin b'chol lashon." Here are the prayers here are the things you could say in any language. And then the Mishnah says, and here are the Torah mandated declarations that have to be said specifically in Lashon HaKodesh, or even more specifically, the language as they appear in the Torah. For example, the Kohen cannot get up and say, "May the Lord bless you and keep you." He can't say that. He has to say, "Yavarechecha Hashem u'yishmerecha." And at a chalitza ceremony, the brother-in-law and the sister-in-law, they are going to be parting ways. All their lines have to be said in the original text. Whereas a get can be written and declared, etc. Those could be in any other language. And in this category of that which can be said in any language, we find Kriyat Shema. Interestingly enough, there's no sections from the Torah that are more familiar to every Jew alive from childhood than Kriyat Shema. But the halacha is clearly that if a person has a proper translation, the Rambam says that's miduyak, like in the Hebrew, translate exactly the way it's supposed to be, and a person says it nice and clearly in any language, that is Kriyat Shema. And then the Mishnah says, so too with the prayers. Prayers can be said in any language. We're talking about tefillah, we're talking about Shemona Esrei. The Shemona Esrei can be said in any language. And then the Gemara brings up this very kasha, right there in Sota, that says any language, but doesn't say right here in Shabbos. The ministering angels, the Mishnah says that a person can pray in any language, but then Chazal say, but don't we have a problem? We just saw in the Gemara here that certainly one shouldn't be speaking Aramaic, perhaps even in other languages that are not Hebrew. So what's the answer? And the answer the Gemara there gives is the tzibur. There's a distinction between the tzibur and the yachid. I'll read you what the Rambam says in his Perush HaMishnayos. I brought it over here. He says here, it's in the seventh paragraph. Lashon HaKodesh. It says anything that's said in any language. It says utfilah yadua. The prayers, those are well known. Umitpalim b'nei adam b'chol lashon. People can pray in any language. Good, I like that. So I'll take my article and pray in English. V'omnam, however, zeh b'tzibur aval yachid yizayer b'atzmo shelo yitpalel ela b'lashon HaKodesh. Talking about a tzibur can pray in any language when you have a minyan, so that works. But if it's a yachid, so now you have to make sure to pray in Lashon HaKodesh. The Rambam, let's work on Shulchan Aruch. This is brought in the Shulchan Aruch, this very opinion that the Rambam has. He says here in Siman Kaf Aleph, Yachol hitpalel b'chol lashon she'yirtzeh. A person can pray in any language. V'hani mili b'tzibur aval yachid lo yitpalel ela b'shon HaKodesh. And then he brings up the opinion of the Rif and the Rush and others who actually made other distinctions. Like we said, the Rush said the whole problem was Aramaic, but praying in any other language but Aramaic is also totally fine. And by the way, it's not about heter, isser, or heter, what's permitted, what's not. Just say the prayer won't work, apparently. Now, we have to address some problems with the Rambam. This is the question that the gentleman asked me before. Do we need angels' help? Do we even care about the angels when we pray? We ask them it actually matters to us that they would help us, and we should do we should appeal to these angels and try to make it easier for them? Are we always supposed to pray directly to God? And indeed, according to the Rambam, that is true. The Rambam did not hold of the sages who felt that someone should actually try to pray and get the angels on his side. Prayer is always directly to God, specifically. And not only the angels are not necessarily the ones who help bring up our prayers, one should not ever try to petition the angels or anybody else for that matter. That's the Rambam's opinion. And interestingly enough, even though here in the Parashah Mishnayos, the Rambam just gave us this distinction that's actually brought in the Shulchan Aruch. It depends. Yachid should daven only in Hebrew, and a tzibur should daven in whatever language the tzibur wants. The Rambam doesn't bring this rule in the entire Mishnah Torah. You look at Mishnah Torah, he talks about prayer. The Rambam includes the laws of Kriyat Shema before the laws of prayer. And what does the Rambam say specifically in the laws of Kriyat Shema? What I told you before. Just like the Mishnah says, Kriyat Shema could be in any language, as long as it's done accurately and precisely. You would think then the Rambam would say also, and prayer also in any language. And there's a distinction, really any language if you have a community, a tzibur, but if it's an individual, it should be done entirely in Hebrew. Why did the Rambam leave out this fundamental rule and the underlying concept? Why did he not bring it in the Mishnah Torah? So I'd like to offer that the Rambam actually does, sort of. The Rambam, like we said, if you're a lot of Rishonim, including the Beit Yosef himself, and you bring this distinction, what's the difference between the Yachid and the Tzibur about how they are supposed to pray? You'll look at the Gemara and says, well, the Tzibur doesn't need the angel's help because it's the Tzibur. The Shechina is among the Tzibur. So the Tzibur could daven in Aramaic or other languages. But the Yachid doesn't have this help, and the Yachid has to rely on, hold on 1 second, I do not want to do that. The Yachid does need help. He doesn't have the Tzibur, he doesn't have the Shechina with him. So the Yachid has to make sure that however he's praying, the angels are with him at least. That seems to be the underlying reason for this distinction, because it's explicit in the Gemara, and that's the way a lot of Rishonim felt. The Rambam doesn't hold that underlying reason. So the Rambam wouldn't bring this rule, but he did bring this rule. No, the Rambam understands it differently. You look in the Mishnah Torah, and the Rambam introduces a strange idea, and that is, where do we even get Shemon Esrei from? Anybody know where did it come from? Well, good. That puts us in a time and a place. It puts us in Jerusalem in the negative 4th century. Why then? David HaMelech, why not Shemon Esrei then? Yes, they made takanas about why it should be, but why did Anshe Knesset Hagadola decide now's the time we're going to make formulas for the prayers and the brachos? So the Rambam says something interesting. It has to do with language. He says that originally people used to pray the way they prayed. A person, it was open. Why? You're supposed to serve God, avodah shebelev, service of the heart, or more accurately, service of the mind. They thought the mind was here, so that's why lev means mind. Okay. He says, right at the beginning of the halachas, in the first parak of Hilchos Tefillah, in the 4th halacha, he says, Kevan shegalu Yisrael b'mei Nebuchadnezzar harasha, since the Jews were exiled from their land in the times of the wicked Nebuchadnezzar, nid arvu bifras v'yavan ushar ha'umot. They got mixed up in places like Paras and Yavan. Interestingly enough, Nebuchadnezzar sent the Jews to Bavel, not to Paras. But he said eventually they made their ways to places like Greece and Persia. And what happened there? Other nations. Hold on 1 second, letting someone in. V'noldu lahem banim b'artzot hagoyim v'lotan banim nitba b'las spatam. Their children were born among these Gentile groups, and they had a confusion of languages. The same type of verb that's mentioned regarding the Tower of Babel. You have Jews, kids grow up in Greece. That next generation, they're fluent Greek speakers. They're not going to be fluent Hebrew speakers. And if you raise your kids here in Israel, they will speak Hebrew. They're not going to grow up speaking French or English. They speak Hebrew, unless you force them to speak English. Unless you yell at them, you better speak in English, or I'm not going to listen to you. Okay. Some even had one language. It was a hodgepodge. Imagine Yiddish and Ladino. Okay. The speaker couldn't ask everything of God that he needed, in one language. Ela b'shibush. It was mixed up, like I said, hodgepodge. And by the way, you find the Gut von Avraham is a prayer written in what language? Yiddish. But then there's thrown in actual Hebrew words in there. Yes, all the letters are Hebrew, but and also this Judeo-Spanish that the Rambam uses, or his actual Perush HaMishnayos I just read to you. You actually read it in Arabic. It's Arabic until he actually quotes something from Chazal or the Torah, and then suddenly goes back into Hebrew. And by the way, the best example of a shibush that the Rambam is talking about is which text? The Gemara. Because the Gemara, you just read it. Line in Hebrew, line in Aramaic. It goes back and forth. That's not right. Shnemar uvnehem chatzim deber ashdodit ve'inam makirim ledeber Yehudit v'chloshon am va'am. Ezra Nehemiah writes, these children who were born in foreign places, their language was half Ashdodit, the language of the Philistine areas, and they did not know how to speak Yehudit. Yehudit is what you and I call Hebrew. That is what they start calling the Hebrew language during the Assyrian era. Once again, Chizkiyahu's time, late First Temple. When one of them would pray, tiktsar lishono, he really couldn't get the words out, didn't know what to say. He didn't know how to ask what he needs or to even relate God's praises in the holy tongue. What would happen is he starts a little Hebrew, like you meet someone on the street, you ask him a question, you start saying, go straight to the right. The Azia Tirem Mashu falls back into his Hebrew. And that's the way these people were, except they were supposed to be praying in Hebrew, but when they got caught, they didn't know what to say. They said, you know what, I'll just say it in Greek. It'll come out better in Greek or in Persian. And that was the problem. The Chemen Shiraz Rabbeinu Cain, Ala Seder. It's because of this, Ezra and his based in, we call the Anshe Knesset Gadol, decided, you know what, we're going to have these brachas ala Seder. Here's the brachas, here's the order, and everybody's going to say it. So what we're talking about individuals here. Shalosh Rishonot, Shevach, etc. And this is what allows, the Rambam continues, now that we have this, they're the ones who established all the brachas and all the prayers that we have sturot. That's why we call the book that now holds all the brachas and tefillas in the proper order. We call that a sidur, I'll shame the seder. Okay. The ileg is a person who can't speak clearly. So this takana is basically to help individuals. That is, according to the Rambam, the distinction between praying in a foreign language as a group and praying in a foreign language as an individual comes down to this. When you have a tzibur who are all speaking one language, they're all speaking Persian, like we're doing right now. I'm speaking English, and I'm among you. So you understand what I am saying mostly, and I'm speaking on our behalf. I'm reading from the Gemara and the halachas right now. And if I wanted to say the prayer for the president, like we used to do back in the young Israel of out of town, so that sometimes they even said that, King of Kings, bless the president of this land and the vice president and all the officers, etc. You understand what I'm saying, and it's clear, and it's in English, and there's never a problem. And the rabbi even gets up and gives a drasha in that language, the king's English. Fine, that works. If an individual were to have to, anybody, let's say not everybody is an orator like Bibi himself, so what would happen? Let's say you had to now pray. You need to go through a full set of daily prayers. Imagine you never saw the Shemona Esrei, but you suddenly know you have to put together a good prayer today, and you have no Sidur, and you only know how to pray in English because you're not a fluent Hebrew speaker. What are you going to pray then, as an individual? That's why we have a chazan, by the way. What's a chazan? He's the one who sees the words. He has the Sidur in front of him. He's saying it out loud for everybody else. They just have to listen well and say amen. So individuals should not be praying in a foreign language. And in order to prevent this, we actually have the Takana. By the way, what the Rambam is saying here is far from unanimous among the Rishonim. This was his view. I'm just explaining the Rambam's view. Shulchan Aruch's view was quite clear. The Rambam was saying that Ezra and his base created the Shemona Esrei, the Shemona Esrei as we know it, in order to help those individuals. Those individuals now have the Shemona Esrei. It's lined up. Every bracha, you're going to say it the same day. You're saying the same way every single day of the year. Rosh Hashanah, it's a little bit different. So you'll specifically be in a community, and there'll be one person who really knows what he's doing. We call him a chazan. He'll discharge everybody else's obligation for them. But the prayer exists as we have it now because a Yachid should be davening in Hebrew. Or better yet, a Yachid should daven in Hebrew because that is a set prayer that makes Am Yisrael unified so that every individual is praying everyone else and he will not make mistakes, or at least he won't speak to God in some jumble language. It is ironic now. So you should ask me, and this is the last point we're getting at, I found Aramaic in my siddur, right? The Kaddish. So just know, Tosfos says in Brachos, maybe you learned this with Rabbi Nadel a few years ago when you're starting the beginning of Brachos, he says, they said that wasn't necessarily prayer. The Kaddish was actually to break up sections of the prayer, or was said when they finished the Shiur. Rabbi gave a Shiur, there was 10 men, they all learned Torah together, so you say Kaddish. But even if that was the case, in Bavel they did this. In Eretz Yisrael, the minhag always was, what? Even the Kaddish is said in Hebrew. You look at the old texts of the Siddurim, and I have quite a few Siddurim back at home. I kept one in the car, and there are purists and traditionalists, those who like to get back to the way things used to be, and they're putting together new old-fashioned Siddurim where they put back the old texts, and indeed, you can find that the Kaddish there appears in Hebrew. And there were some before Mr. Miller bought Korain. They put out a series of Siddurim, and they actually had Kaddish alongside the Kaddish that we know in Aramaic in Hebrew. There are even some make a claim, they say the name of Rashi, that certain words of Kaddish should be in Hebrew. The first two words shouldn't be Yithgadal and Yithkadash, it should be Yithgadel and Yithkadesh. Then the question is, what about all the other ones? You would say Yithbarech and Yishtabeach, Yithpaer, Yithromeim. Yithnaseh is the same thing in Hebrew and Aramaic. If you're going to say that, you should say everything in English. It's a machlokas Rashi and Tosfos. Rashi apparently says the first two words are Hebrew. Tosfos says the entire thing is Aramaic. And the purists say that the entire Kaddish, like everything else in the prayers, should be in Hebrew. And if you have everybody speaking Aramaic, so you could pray everything in Aramaic, including Kaddish. It doesn't matter. It's a foreign language, but everybody knows that foreign language. Nowadays, I think it would be better. Thank God, many of us have learned Hebrew. We do live in Jerusalem, of course, and many of us have to deal with Hebrew all the time. So it might be even better now to go back to saying the Kaddish in Hebrew, like the rest of the prayers, which we reasonably understand, than to say it in Aramaic. And as for Yom Purkan, it's not just there's an urban legend out there. That was the first thing the Reform did, take out Yom Purkan. It wasn't the Reform who took it out. It's the Sephardim. Sephardim and other groups do not say Yom Purkan. Why should they? They instead say a prayer for the tzibur and for the rabbis in Hebrew. Have you seen it? Okay, good. So you're familiar with the Sephardic siddur. Like all the Sephardic congregations, they never had this thing. They're not afraid of Reform. They say everything in Hebrew. And not only that, do they say everything in Hebrew. I think I told you guys last year about this. On the Temple Mount, for a while, they were preventing Jews from saying prayers that were recognizable. So they said Kaddish. But the problem is the Waqf, Yimach Shemam, may God remove them soon speedily, say amen. They were preventing Jews from saying Kaddish. So they decided we're going to go back to saying Kaddish in Hebrew. Because even though it's fully Kaddish, the bad guys don't recognize that as Kaddish. It's like they don't let you wear a tallis. Tallis looks like a white sheet with black stripes, like over there, or blue stripes, or just white stripes. But if your tallis resembles a sports jacket because there's four corners, they'll let you do that. Or a long vest, or even a bekisha with tzitzis on it, they'll let you do. Why? Because that's nish kind of tallis, even though it is a tallis. We know the halacha. So they started saying the Kaddish in Aramaic. And the last point is, you can look in the Siddur. I found in the art scroll, even though the Shemon Esrei is entirely in Hebrew, I found some Aramaic in there. Where's the Aramaic in the Shemon Esrei? It says, "Hamachazir shechinato l'Sion." Machazir is a Hebrew form, but it's Hebraicized Aramaic. Lahachazir in Hebrew, at least according to biblical Hebrew, is lihashiv. Correct? Hashava saveda, to return, not lahachzir. So in modern Hebrew also we say lahachzir. And the answer is yes, that does come from the Aramaic, but it's in Hebraicized. We changed the consonants around. In Aramaic, it's hey dalid resh. And in Aramaic hey becomes a Hebrew het, and Aramaic dalid becomes a Hebrew zayin. In Aramaic was pronounced like the dalid at the end of Shema, like the. So the Aramaic the becomes a Hebrew zayin. So the hazir is a new Hebrew form, and it's also in the hif'il. In Aramaic, they don't have the same hif'il form like we do in Hebrew. So even though the hazir came from the Aramaic, it's already been sufficiently Hebraicized that it is entirely Hebrew. But then again, you could also find older texts of Shemon Esrei that even words like Lachazir don't appear. And instead, we have real, true Hebrew forms, like you're used to, the V'te'arev lefanecha tefilatenu, that they say on the Shalosh Regalim at Musaf. What is the word for Achazir in that prayer? Ana rachum hashev shechinatecha l'Sion. Not Hachazer, Hashev, the true Hebrew form. So you can still find it. Older versions of the prayer are entirely in Hebrew, and perhaps the way it should be. And if you're interested in getting a copy of these Sidurim, I could, introduce you to the right people, and they exist. But the bottom line is, the Rambam doesn't hold like the Shulchan Aruch over here why you shouldn't pray in the Tzibur in other languages. According to the Rambam, we pray in Hebrew as individuals because if we were to everybody to pray in his own language, it would not come out well. Of course, nowadays we have the printing press, and now we can, if you are an English speaker, you can actually print up yourself. You could go to the bookstore and get yourself a copy of the Shemona Esrei in English. Many of us have it at home. We have it at Art School. We have the Birnbaum. I think Birnbaum was the first one in English, and we have the ones they put out in England. So it's not an issue necessarily anymore, but that's only because of technology. But in the old days, they didn't have this, so they couldn't do it. Let's go a little bit farther in the Gemara. Yeah, the Rambam always has a different take than everybody else because his viewpoint is always different. Like I said, the Rambam basically dismisses this idea that it really matters if the angels could hear the prayers. The point of praying in Hebrew is that it's a matter of elocution, saying it right. And the Tzibur doesn't necessarily have the same problem because the Tzibur has a spokesman who knows what he's saying. It says here, I'm going to point to it on. Can you guys still see the Gemara? Like, I can't see it. I'm sharing the Gemara with you, but I'll put it over here. It's right here, right over here in the middle. V'lo yikra le'or haner. You should not read by candlelight on Shabbos. Let me ask you a question. Wait a minute. I read on Shabbos night, sit in my living room. We have no problem. Why has it not become a problem anymore? Simply because our lights are so bright and no one needs to adjust them. You're not going to go and adjust your lights. Some people have dimmers, but most of us do not. There's no way I could adjust these lights. If I try to adjust it, I might electrocute myself. Okay? You can't do it. So it says here, Amar Rabba, afilu gavoa shtei komod, afilu shtei mirdaot. This prohibition applies even if the candles are 2 floors above him. They had a large room with high ceilings. The candles were lit by someone right before Shabbos. He would go around on a ladder and light them. The shamas of the Beis Knesset. Now everybody's in shul, so they cannot read by this candlelight because we still are worried that he's going wherever he's sitting, he's not getting enough light. He's going to do something, fiddle with the lamp, which is basically very primitive. It's just a wick sitting in oil and burning. That's basically what it was. How do you make a wick sitting in oil burn brighter or not? Well, okay, and another way is sometimes the tilting just exposes more wick above the oil. You could play with this at home. If you have just a little bit of wick above the oil, so you'll have a small flame. And if you have more wick above the oil, the more wick exposed to the air, you'll have a larger flame. And indeed, even though most of us do not read by candlelight, thank God we have light bulbs. A light bulb gives 100 candle power, or whatever it is. They used to measure that. They used to measure the light bulbs. You have a single candle or 2 candles, whatever it is. So this little adjustment will make it easier to read, and that's what the sages were afraid of because that would be a malach on Shabbos. And the mir da'ot are apparently the light poles. Yeah, they used to have that. There's an idea. You put in the street a pole on which the lamp is standing. Why? Because if the lamp is low, it won't shed light high. And also you could bump into it. But if you put the lamp up on a metal pole, so it'll give you better light. Even though it's on two of these high poles, you still cannot read by candlelight on Shabbos, lest you come to fiddle with it and do a malacha. While filu asarabatim zo al gav zo, chad hu delo likre. Even many rooms, one on top of the other. Okay? That's so far away. It doesn't really matter. Once the sage just said this, I guess lo plug, chad hu delo likre. One rule: he should not be reading by candlelight. So, by the way, what's the way to do on Shabbos? This basically was most of history. Once Shabbos came, who was staying up reading their Gemara at night? If they had manuscripts or they had Sifrei Tanakh, did they read Shabbos night? The answer is no. They did things by heart, or they did something that many of us have forgotten to do at night, which is go to sleep. Okay? No, I'm serious. We have electricity now. It has changed our minds. It changed our hormones. It used to be all these halachas with nida were dependent on moonlight. why is it that you could count on certain things being regular according to the month? Because the light outside is affected by the moon. Nowadays, most of us don't even look at the moon, and it doesn't really matter how much light the moon gives us. We have street lights that are LED. It's almost like stadium light outside. And many of us put on these types of fluorescents. We sit in the shul like Beit Knesset on the Sea. Friday evening at 7 p.m., we have a Malev Malka, Onek Shabbos, and we go until 10 o'clock at night. We expose ourselves to these bright lights that mimic sunlight. We are going to play, we're basically playing hockey with our brain hormones, which is not that smart. Had Trey Shapir Dami. He says, Chad, one person should not be reading, but perhaps two can. Once you have two people, now the Gzeira is okay, good. Even if the candle's right here on the table, two people are reading together. What? Yeah, they'll remind each other. The Brisa says, not one person, not two people. It doesn't matter how many people. Amar Rabbi Lazar, lo kasha, no problem. I resolve this. Kan bin yonechad, kan bishnei inyanim. If they're reading the same Gemara, they're learning b'chavrusa, and usually even if they have two Gemaras, wow, that they're fantastically rich. It used to be means one inyan means they're reading together out of the same scroll. Here it's with two inyanim. When we say they should not be reading by candlelight, it means they're not reading the same thing, so they're not paying attention to each other. If you're really engrossed with what you're learning, you don't care what the other guy's reading, and that's the basic halacha. That's the way they rule. And Rav Huna says, Amar Rav Huna, uva midura filu asra b'nei adam asur. If it's a midura, that means it means a torch. It doesn't really matter. It's still forbidden. Rashi says, midurat eish gedula. Okay, a large fire on a torch. Where they used to put torches, they used to put them in the wall, but they would stick away from the wall. And how you make a torch? Don't do it at home anymore. It's a hot fire hazard. The whole yoshvin rachok zemizeh. They're all sitting far from each other, even though there are many of them. The torch gives enough light, but now everybody's far away from each other. One guy's not going to notice what the other one's doing. And what's going to happen? The od shen zanvoto udim smuchim lahem. Ein ze makir b'vach havero lahavir v'ulachatot. Also, you ever notice light flickers? You have a torch. It's not like we have just constant. It changes a little bit. You will not notice, because the way the light flickers, you will not notice his shadow or just notice his motion when he goes to, whatever. I don't know how you make a torch brighter. What would you do to brighten the torch? Depends on what you make the torch out of. I don't put more oil into the torch, whatever it is he's doing to brighten it, the others will not notice. So we'll pause here and pick up the rest on Thursday. Questions, comments, grievances? Yeah, so it means like that. Yeah. So sometimes it means like that. They used to say that actually no, we'll leave it for next time. Throwing a twig into the bonfire isn't going to brighten the fire. It means he has to put in a whole bunch of sticks. You might notice that. We're talking about little adjustments. The problem is, even a little adjustment on Shabbos and Malacha, and they're not going to notice that. I remember we used to have campfires. What happens? Someone used to put on something. It's like, oh, it's going down. Put on a few more sticks, another large tree branch. And then suddenly, and then it has that first point where nothing happens. Then suddenly it bursts into flames. So they might notice, but it's already too late. They wouldn't have noticed that. We'll see. Thank you very much. Be well.
We would like to encourage our viewers to share these videos with friends and send in your responses. If you would like to obtain Birkon Nusach Eretz Yisrael or invite the rabbi for a speaking engagement, please email us at office@machonshilo.org.